When Alien Isolation was first released back in 2014, it was a game that 15-year-old me decided to steer well clear of. That is until 2021, when I decided to play it for the first time for my YouTube channel. Once the videos were done and up, I dropped it immediately, as I was absolutely terrified to go any further in the game. But since the horror game reviews apparently do very well, and the new Alien movie is out in cinemas, here I am again, now playing Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation puts us in the shoes of Amanda Ripley, the daughter of Ellen Ripley, the protagonist of the first Alien movie, as she searches for answers to what happened to her mother. The search brings her and a small team of Weyland-Yutani employees to the Sevastopol, a space station housing thousands of people and their families, as well as an army of worker androids. As Amanda moves through the station, she finds it in a state of complete disarray. Pipes are bursting, machinery is malfunctioning, and the walls are now graffitied with messages that comprise of warnings, curses, and outright gibberish. Body bags are piled up in neat rows that stretch the length of a large room, which is now a makeshift mass grave. With this, we realise that something has gone dramatically wrong on this station, and as we figure that out, we are gradually introduced to what could be considered the Sevastopol's new food chain. We have the human survivors, who have since armed themselves and formed groups and gangs in order to survive, shooting strangers on sight if they get too close. We then have the working Joes, androids covered in an ill-fitting rubber skin, with white glowing eyes that turn red when hostile. As they move, they speak with a mix of corporate propaganda and sarcasm, and when they see and catch you, their uncanny faces never change as they move to end you, their red glowing eyes peering out at their cold, lifeless faces. And then we have the Xenomorph, the apex predator of the station, and the one you will soon come to fear the most. So, because it's arguably one of the most important aspects of this game, I want to first talk about the environment of Alien Isolation. For a game that was released a decade ago, it is one that still looks genuinely stunning. The Sevastopol itself is arguably the second main character of this game. It is an environment that oozes personality. It feels alive, or rather, it felt alive. Its clear creative assembly put in a remarkable amount of effort to recapture the retro-futurism of Ridley Scott's Alien. With the station running on small single-colour CRT screens, retro computer terminals, and a heavily industrialised vision of a ship that operates on levers, switches, and cranks that Amanda will have to interact with to try and find her way off the ship and to safety. While the events of Alien Isolation primarily take place on the Sevastopol, there are certain flashback sequences that serve as context with the story. It's those sections that I found to be some of the most beautiful. Seeing the derelict ship and the space jockey from the original film all faithfully recreated in-game was an absolute treat, allowing us a boots-on-the-ground view of the derelict ship's mysterious, inhuman design and its near-overwhelming scale. When it comes to moving through the world of Alien Isolation, Creative Assembly ensures that traversing through the ruins of the Sevastopol never feels meaningless, dull, or a slog. Instead, almost every area is a meticulously crafted horror show that will keep you in a constant state of fear. It achieves this with what can only be described as a genuine masterclass in audio and visual work. From the ambient noises and groans coming deep within the ship, the swell of the orchestral score when an enemy is alerted to you, the shuffling coming from the vents getting louder and louder, accompanied by the pinging of the motion tracker increasing in frequency. And then there are the unmistakable sounds of the Xenomorph itself, hissing and growling like a wild animal, its heavy footsteps stomping as it patrols the hallways. It knows you're nearby, and it will find you eventually. All it needs to do is wait for you to panic and make a mistake. The audio and visual work complement each other across the entire playthrough to cement the feeling that you are never completely safe anywhere on the ship. Areas of the Sevastopol are reused at numerous points throughout the game, but to keep things fresh, these areas that you thought you were already familiar with are now populated by new enemies with pathways that are now locked out, destroyed, or barricaded. With all this, it manages to keep this element of backtracking fresh throughout. And whilst I felt dejected that areas I hated going through hours ago I would now have to go through again, this was not out of frustration with the design, but simply out of fear of what is now lurking there. I will also add that I was a huge fan of the saving system in this game. There isn't any autosaving outside of curated moments towards the end. Instead, the player needs to manually save at registration points. And these aren't found in safe rooms where nothing can get you, like Resident Evil. They're right in the middle of the danger. Especially in the later game, timing your save becomes remarkably important to your survival. Throughout her time on the Sevastopol, Amanda will craft various tools to help her along the way. These can range from novel distractions such as the noisemaker and flares to the more offensive pipe bomb and Molotov cocktails. I found myself relying on distractions to pull the enemy away from my objective. It's in these rare moments where if you mess this up, the whole situation could plunge into chaos. To craft all these items, you need to search for scraps and items throughout the Sevastopol, which, rather to my own detriment, I kept forgetting to do, as I was so scared of everything around me. The last thing I wanted to do was to hang around and search an area where death was quite literally around the corner or up in a vent above me. I'd constantly regret my own cowardice, as when I really needed that distraction, I did not have one, making the entire experience much more difficult on myself. It was fantastic. The main event of Alien Isolation is arguably the Xenomorph. We've seen them in games before, usually portrayed as an enemy very easily taken down with the pulse rifle of a colonial marine. With the potential to be overwhelming in large numbers, one lone alien was hardly ever a threat. Alien Isolation sets out to change this, bringing the alien more in line with the vision of the first film, that of the perfect organism, smart, adaptable, deadly, precise, and near unkillable. To do this, Creative Assembly set out to create an antagonist that isn't your run-of-the-mill patrolling enemy. It's an enemy that is constantly learning, it's unpredictable, and it will improvise on the fly. Through a remarkably complex AI, the alien will adapt to and learn exactly how you play, enabling it to anticipate your next move at many points. For example, there are points where after searching nearby, it will vanish into a vent, and as soon as you move out of your hiding place, it drops back into the area again, ready to attempt an ambush. The situation gets especially tricky later in the game in the Hive. Up to this point, the Xenomorph has been absent from the game, having been ejected into space in an earlier mission. It had since been replaced by a new and rather irritating version of the Working Joes, an upgraded model that is more intelligent and far more durable than the standard models we've been dealing with. And then, just as we'd grown used to playing what has effectively become an android-killing first-person shooter, suddenly and without warning, we encounter the Hive. And it's made clear that there was never just one Xenomorph, but rather dozens. As we step into the Hive, we are greeted by eggs containing facehuggers, and also the very defensive Xenomorph that will stop at nothing to hunt you down and end you. This is arguably one of the most uncomfortable and terrifying areas I've ever had to navigate in a game. With my only deterrent being my flamethrower with limited ammo, even my motion tracker wasn't reliable anymore, as it now pinged dozens of targets, meaning the one thing I relied on for relative safety and guidance for the last 12 hours could no longer be trusted. So to make it through, I'd need to be slow and methodical, use my eyes, ears, and a flamethrower, a weapon that the Xenomorph won't be afraid of forever, to try and keep it at bay and escape. One thing I remember seeing in reviews when this game first came out was the mentioning that the Xenomorph's AI could be frustrating to navigate, and sometimes death to it felt unfair or didn't make sense. Maybe this was different back in 2014, but in my own playthrough of Alien Isolation, usually, if not always, me dying to it was pretty much my own fault. such as using the motion tracker, which emits an audible ping the alien can hear but would give me away, or when I'd completely whiff a noisemaker throw, bouncing off something just to land right in front of me. I'd give the alien its flowers for getting me on such mistakes, and whilst I found it punishing at points, especially if I hadn't saved in a while, it always felt fair enough. With the Xenomorph, it was a rare instance where the intelligence of an NPC felt truly terrifying, and because of this, I would try and meticulously plan for any eventuality, but when it comes to it, you simply can't. It is one of the best and most intelligent antagonists I've ever gone up against in a horror game. Nothing comes close, and in the decade it has been out, nothing has since. The story of Alien Isolation is a love letter to the original film whilst also being strong enough to stand up on its own. This is especially true of its characters. From the smaller parts, such as Axel, the first human survivor we meet, who also has the honour of being the Xenomorph's first on-screen kill, to the larger roles of characters such as Samuels and Amanda Ripley. The characters of Alien Isolation are well written, and their performances are incredibly compelling. With each line, they truly sold the desperation of the situation. Even during the slower sections, their performances kept me fully immersed. Amanda Ripley herself is a solid protagonist. As a Weyland-Yutani engineer, she can be very resourceful, crafting all manner of tools and items from scraps left behind on the ship to help her through this nightmarish environment. Whilst she is shown to be intelligent and resourceful, it's not so much so that she is unstoppable. The threats of the Sevastopol will still outmatch her in a straightforward fight. When she holds a gun, there is a clear sense of unfamiliarity, and a shot has to be carefully placed and well timed. Up until Alien Isolation, not much was known about Amanda Ripley outside of a deleted scene from the second film. I feel like Alien Isolation manages to flesh her out as a character that, simply put, is her mother's daughter, a confident, no-nonsense, strong-willed survivor through and through. I also particularly enjoyed the character of Samuels, the Weyland-Yutani android. In a series where androids usually work to push forward the company's best interests, it usually puts them at odds with the human survivors. However, Samuels is actively shown to be good-natured. During the later points of the story, we initially believe him to be responsible for the Working Joe's murderous reprogramming. It is soon revealed that he is not. He is actively trying to stop them, going so far as to die trying to get the station's AI to lift the lockdown and stop the Working Joe's rampage. Whilst this attempt does inevitably fail, in a surprisingly emotional turn, he does manage to push through one instruction to the station's AI: speak to Amanda Ripley. If he can't stop them, he can at least use this moment to try and give her the closure that brought her to this place to begin with. Whilst I enjoyed most of the story elements of Alien Isolation, there were points I found it grounded to a halt slightly, especially between missions 11 and 13, where the game briefly becomes an android blasting FPS just for you to be forced to surrender your weapons and stealth your way through the new, more durable, and as I said before, really irritating Working Joes. That is until you find the spike gun, but even these upgraded Working Joes don't stand a chance against. I will also say that the spike gun was probably one of the best cases of getting even with an annoying NPC I've ever had in a game. Whilst I understand that they needed this lull to give the player the illusion that the Xenomorph was no longer the main threat, this section simply felt too long, and rather counter to what I enjoyed about the game prior to this. In my opinion, especially in a horror game that takes 18 hours to finish, I feel like it would have lost nothing if this section was cut just a little bit shorter. Another thing about the story is how much I enjoyed learning about the Sevastopol and its inhabitants through the numerous terminal messages and ID tags. I felt all these small parts came together to tell the story of an institution already laden with problems long before the Xenomorph arrived. One plagued by malfunctioning equipment, budget cuts, self-interest, ulterior motives, and the trappings of bureaucracy. The introduction of the Xenomorph was simply the last straw that enabled this station to fall into complete chaos. Much like the premise of the original films, the alien was never the overarching villain. In reality, it's Weyland-Yutani, it's Seegson, it's these corporations, and the criminally inhuman plans that they will set in motion in order to achieve more power. Even if it comes at the cost of human lives, it's a hazard that is nothing more than an acceptable loss to a company that doesn't see its employees as people, but rather just numbers on a spreadsheet. But I will answer this question with a short story. There was one jump scare that occurred around the midway point of the game, so I am no stranger to them at this point. This particular one was a flashbang from an explosion right in front of me. When this happened, I felt a tightening in my chest, the kind that makes you think, oh yeah, this might be it. No other horror game has ever had me genuinely concerned I may be having a heart attack. So yeah, scary game. I come out of this experience a new man, ready to live life to the fullest, and maybe even find religion. But to conclude, I was not expecting Alien Isolation to be as enjoyable as it was. I was concerned that being in a constant state of fear and dread with an average heart rate of 120 BPM would have worn me out to a point I lost interest in playing it, especially with it being longer than any horror game I've played so far, but that never happened. But when the credits did roll, I kinda slumped down in my chair and stared at the wall for a solid 5 minutes, a feeling of relief washing over me like a wave that this incredible nightmare was finally over. This is going to sound odd, but I mean it as a high compliment. I genuinely couldn't wait for this game to end, and I will give all the credit I can to the minds at Creative Assembly for making one of the best and most unrelenting horror games I've ever experienced, and one that somehow never got the sequel that I feel it rightfully deserves. An opinion I do not believe I'm alone in having.